Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Despite the fact that it says 2023 on the screen, it's still 2022. My name is Jake Melstein. I host panels for Critical Insight, and we're going to talk about a lot today when we talk about 2023 predictions. And it's going to be a very exciting deck because we had Chat GPT create it, so we don't know what's in it. No, I'm just kidding. Um, no. All joking aside, we're gonna go through some 23 predictions. We're gonna talk about 2022. Um, but before we jump into it, and as people come into the room, there's economic uncertainty happening. There's all these things. We do hope that everybody attending, we do hope everybody watching this on YouTube later, did have a successful, good 2022, and that your 2023 begins on a happy note. And that you didn't have bad breaches, or that you and that your life is full of happiness as we get into the holidays. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about our 2022 predictions. We did this a year ago, and we are going to be very honest about, were we right? Really, was Mike right? Really, that's the question. We're going to find out. We're going to do a bit of a year in review. And that's going to get us to the 2023 predictions and what we think is going to happen, what's going to happen in the next year. We put Q&A on there, but if you've been to any of our events, the right thing to do is ask questions as we go. Put them in the chat. I loved interrupting Fred and Mike. I will interrupt them with your questions. And if we have time at the end, we'll do Q&A. By the way, there is a chat on the right, and let us know where you're from, where you're joining from, who you are. We love knowing where we're from. In our last one of these, we had somebody joining us from as far away as Australia, and we'd love to know where you are. Who are we? If you don't know us, Critical Insight provides cybersecurity as a service. That means that we help organizations prepare for an attack, detect an attack, and respond rapidly. Okay. Today, presenting Mike Hamilton, Critical Insight founder and CISO, former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred Langston is our other founder. He's our chief product officer, and he's worked in healthcare cybersecurity for every time I say this, I up. So I think we're at 80 years, Fred.
80.
Actually, 30 years. Yeah. And my name's Jake Melstein. I host the events. One thing to know, in case it's useful before we get into the predictions, is in the chat. If it's going bloop 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 bloop, there's a little bell on the upper right, and you can mute the chat if you want. Or don't mute it, and then you'll be able to see what people are saying. One more thing is, people always ask, am I going to get a recording of this? Yes, we think. So it is technology, and the system should send a recording to everybody who registered, but it's a webinar system. It's not a security system. It doesn't always do what it's supposed to do. So if you don't get a link and you want a link, let us know. Email me, jake@criticalinsight.com, and I'll make sure you get a link, or email Mike or email any of us, and we'll make sure you get a link. Also, if people want a copy of the deck, we're happy to send out a copy of the deck. It's not super secret. These are the predictions, and you can keep it for a year. And then if we're wrong, you can send it back to us and say, Mike, you were wrong.
And that's what I anticipate is exactly that. Yeah.
All right, Mike. What were our so we're gonna do here is we're gonna go through what we predicted and what actually happened. So our first prediction was BEC, business email compromise, will double in magnitude with the funding from the infrastructure bill, and construction companies will be in the crosshairs of business email compromise and ransomware. Mike, did that happen?
Yes and no. So BEC is definitely up, but the prediction had to do with the money that is coming from what is now called the bipartisan infrastructure law, I think, right? It used to be the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act, but they rebranded it. That had to do with all of the contracts that are going to be given to construction companies from local governments to do road work, all kinds of things. And that puts local government squarely in the crosshairs for business email compromise, with all of their construction company contractors having their email accounts being penetrated, sending email to cities saying, here's the bank account we want you to deposit into. Because the infrastructure money hasn't been spread around yet, that hasn't happened. But I'm gonna stick with that, and I'm gonna say when that money starts to flow, BEC is going to happen.
And one truth there, Fred and Mike, is BEC is way up. I
Oh yeah.
mean, we have seen maybe this didn't come true, but BEC is way up, right, Fred?
Yeah, not only is BEC way up, but the attempts at BEC are also way up. So, the amount of phishing emails that people are receiving, they're much better crafted, they're higher quality, and you're getting more of them. So they're just the odds are in their favor at this point.
And some of the phishing email just says, "Please send me all your outstanding invoices." Right? If you do that, it's on you. Okay, nothing can be done for you.
Indeed. Okay, second prediction. Politically motivated hacking will be a factor in elections, and with elected representatives being doxxed. Mike, did that happen?
Yes and no. So there was definitely politically motivated hacking going on all over the place, but the real motivation there was the war, right? So we know about the Ukrainian IT army and the Belarusian cyber partisans, and it turns out there's a whole bunch of these groups, and they are hacking for cause. What we did not see was, for example, ransomware hitting key counties that are conducting elections to create the perception that the vote can't be trusted, regardless of the fact that the administrative infrastructure for a county is not connected to an election infrastructure. You can't do anything to that election infrastructure by hitting a county with ransomware. That's the kind of thing I expected to see. There were little pieces of that going on. I will say that we did pick up the signal of the scanning going on for election infrastructures as distributed by the election security ISAC. They said they sent out a bunch of indicators, and we found those indicators when we went and searched city county customers for Pisces. So we know what was going on. So again, yep, there's a lot of activist stuff going on right now. The motivation is not elections. What happened mostly in the elections was disinformation and a lot of improving methods for countering that quickly.
But Mike, one of the things I saw is that Russia is distracted by the war in Ukraine,
And
and
broke.
that the disinformation coming out of Russia, the election malfeasance coming out of Russia, it actually went down, and some thought is that they're distracted by what's going on in Ukraine. Do you think that's true, and two, do you expect that to continue?
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that the major player in disinformation for the next election is going to be China and not Russia.
Why?
Because they have a bigger stake in the outcome. Regardless of the fact what Russia's going through right now, the sanctions don't just come from us; they come from all the other countries. They're going to be struggling to basically survive, and the outcome of the election is not going to have that great a bearing on their survival. China, on the other hand, is the key competitor in the world, and they have. We'll get to this in a minute. Their tactics are changing, and they're looking like the much more serious actor here.
Got it. Okay. Prediction: U.S. government will make progress in incarcerating criminals, and this will cause a backlash from the criminal community. Oh, you said this vociferously a year ago.
Yeah. And it's definitely happening, and we've seen the Conti ransomware gang threatening us. And it has to do in part with the war. It also has to do with some apprehensions that have gone on. And again, we'll get to this in a minute, but I think that's going to change. And I believe that some of the state actors that have been identified through really careful attribution analysis, I think some of those are likely going to get snatched, and that's going to turn into a big diplomatic problem.
Um, and I mean, they had. By the way, whatever you think of the prisoner exchange that just happened, um, one of the things that I've seen over and over, Mike, is that there was talk of
Yep.
giving the Russians back some of their cyber criminals as part of the prisoner exchange, and that may be the future of getting back Whelan, right?
It it could be, but notably, we offered the cyber criminals, and Russia said no. So that begs the question a little bit, just how much value does Russia put on these criminals as actors on behalf of the state? That throws that into question a little bit.
Hmm. Well, I guess not a good day to be a cyber criminal. I don't know. Okay. Prediction: managed security will become a dominant cyber employer. What happened?
So, yeah, I mean, managed security, because of the shortage of human resources and the fact that they're expensive and they're not distributed well around the country, managed services are, being successful and ticking up. But the macro econ is not happening. We're looking at a possible recession. Inflation is up, interest rates went up. All of those things don't help. While managed services are a potential solution to the people shortage, if you don't have any money to hire a managed service either, you're just kind of stuck. So, I believe the macro econ is going to get better in the upcoming year, but right now that's kind of sludge in the crankcase.
And if
I,
you're thinking, go ahead, Fred.
I was going to jump in. The one thing that has changed is that product vendors, virtually all product vendors now are trying to turn a managed service offering out around their product.
Yep.
So that's the one place that there has been this kind of stealthy growth on managed services.
Law firms even.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of how the growth will happen, rather than having, millions of new managed services companies, MSSPs. You're going to have these product vendors all jumping into this space, and that's going to eat a lot of that content up.
Yep.
And Fred, so tell me how that works. Like if you have a bunch of different tools, a bunch of different security tools, all of which are managed, do you then have to manage a bunch of different vendors, not tools? Is that sort of the end game there?
Well, everything depends on exactly which vendor and which product or service you're talking about. But the reality is, if you're having one entity manage, for example, your endpoint EDR provider, and they're going to do all your monitoring, it's going to be EDR focused. It's not going to be network focused. It's not going to be looking necessarily maybe at the IoT or some other like software as a service or cloud environments. So you really need to think holistically. And that's the main thing, that you're monitoring all of your environments now. For years we said, oh, it's okay to monitor just the network. You got to monitor everything now. And that's the difference.
Got it. All right. Prediction. And by the way, I'm curious for folks in the audience. Go ahead and put in the chat. I see who some of you are. You have plenty of security tools. Are your security tools vendors saying, "Hey, we'll manage that for you for an additional fee"? I'm curious whether that's coming to you or not. All right, Mike. Prediction: Russia and China use of cutouts.
Yep. Well, it's finally been authoritatively demonstrated, I think, this year, that the ransomware gangs in Russia do, in some sense, report to the state. There is some collusion there. There's some tool sharing, and these two happened in 2021. But you gotta look at the 16 critical sectors and the things that are being selected as targets. Especially health. It's a strategic value to Russia to just throw chaos at us. And there is a lot of that going on when you're talking about Colonial Pipeline, and that's energy sector, frankly, although pipeline is transportation sector. JBS meets food and ag, right? Those are critical sectors, and that is the kind of stuff that's being hit. And I gotta think, somebody is back there making strong suggestions about what targeting should look like.
Yep. Hey, I'm going to go back to the managed service one because we're getting some great comments in the chat here. Everybody's saying, that all the vendors are saying they'll do MDR, that they'll co-manage things, that folks are, Mike says, I'm looking for some unicorn partners who could co-manage multiple tools or at least a SIM solution, and Sentinel. Chad has somebody at the Palo Alto conference right now, and they're predicting the SOC will be replaced by AI in 5 years. Fred, how do you see all of that?
Well, I think the first thing is, when you're talking about the services, co-managed services is different than a fully managed service, which is different than like an MDR or XDR, like alerting and investigation service. So you really have to understand what it is you're actually talking to them about. A co-managed solution usually means they keep it running, they look at the alerts, you look at the alerts, you kind of work together. If it's something where you're outsourcing the entire component, you're just you're receiving the results of investigations and people responding to alerts on your behalf. So it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. And will AI actually solve all these problems? Of course not. AI will certainly help in certain areas where efficiency, I think that's the place AI is going to become really useful. I don't think it's going to be a magic detection tool, for the simple fact that the bad guys know it's trivially easy to fool AI. If you know how it works or what it's trying to do, you feed it a new training set on your own on the outside, and all of a sudden you've retrained it to miss the kind of attack you want to use. So it will always have that blind spot from a detection capability.
And I'll say too that any prediction about AI taking over full automation in the next 5 years, I would just remind everyone, but that it's been the year of PKI every year since 1988.
Yeah.
So that's how those predictions go.
All right. Next one, Mike. It'll be warmer than Cold War.
Yeah, that was not my choice of words. That was what was coming out a lot at the time. And yeah, I mean, we see what's going on in Ukraine, right? I mean, they've really gone after infrastructure, and some of that has been cyber that they will precede with, and then they come in with something kinetic. But Chinese are strongly suspected to have taken down part of the energy grid in India. We're seeing water utilities getting hit. There's ports, so it's not just Russia, the US, China. There are lots of countries that are now starting to use this as a tool against their adversaries. And the stove is getting turned way up right now. It's 2023 is not going to be a fun year, I believe.
All right. And then insurance company cyber requirements will become more concerning to the C-suite than federal regulations. I'll actually start on this one because there are a couple of meetings I've had where I've met with insurance companies, I've met with hospital boards. There's one hospital board I talked to where, for the first time, they didn't want to talk about HIPAA at all. They didn't want to talk about ransomware at all. All they wanted to talk about was their insurance rates and what do we need to do to keep our insurance rates flat, and what about all of these things that our insurance is asking for? And oh my gosh, these things are all new, and Fred and Mike, I know you've seen that too.
Yep. And I'll say what I've been saying, that if you don't take credit cards, handle health data, produce energy, or manage criminal justice information, you're not regulated. Until now, because insurance companies have become the de facto regulators for everyone, and that's not going to stop. It needs to improve because they don't know what they're doing. I could prove that, but this isn't going to cease.
I think the most challenging part of the insurance industry is it's going to be evolving. Every year, the requirements are probably going to get more stringent. The requirements are going to get more lengthy. It's going to get harder to get it, and probably deductibles will go up, or even potentially harder to qualify. And it was interesting that this year we finally thought we'd have resolution on the act of war exclusion for paying out of insurance, and it turns out Mondelez and the huge suit turned out to be a complete nothing burger in terms of precedent setting, because they waffled on the exact definition.
Yep.
So we didn't
Take
get
that,
anywhere.
Lloyd's of London.
Yep, didn't get anywhere that one. Too bad.
And the other thing is, when you think about Mike, you talked about the insurance companies as the de facto regulators. One of the things we saw this year was the year sort of started with very strict rules for the insurance companies, what they wanted banks to do, what they wanted financial service to do, and what they wanted healthcare to do. And then what we saw as the year went on is they said, oh, that's actually maybe working to reduce the risk for us, the insurance company. And so now we're going to distribute that to everybody. So these things that that everybody is uh, that everybody's been talking about for healthcare and all of that. Well, now those requirements are for everybody. So there you go.
Yeah, and we got a prediction coming up about this too, and Fred just actually kind of teed it up.
We sure do. All right, watershed events of 2022. Mike, your list.
Okay, these are the things. So I think most people know I go through lots of news to put the news blast out every day, and these are the things that stand out to me. You may not be familiar with all of these, and I'm just going to try and go through these quickly. So SSAs, sector-specific agencies. Way back in 2021, when Colonial Pipeline got hit, we found out that the TSA was the sector-specific agency for pipelines, and they had done nothing to establish controls that they were requiring of pipeline operators. Okay, we've also found out EPA hasn't said anything to the water sector, and notably waste processing, which is actually really, really important. Who else? Coast Guard, ports. So now we're finding out, the SSAs are getting very explicit with their instructions to different sectors. And so while CISA cannot regulate, the sector-specific agencies can conduct rulemaking against the purview that they already have. All that's going on right now. You talked about the Mondelez, not Petya lawsuit, where the finding ultimately, there was another one too, and it may have been Primera, somebody. There were two lawsuits, and in both of them, they said, no, the insurance company has to cover that because you were collateral damage. You were not the target. So everybody, yes, take that, Lloyd's of London. Everybody can take a breath on that. Actions taken by the federal government to stop ransomware. Treasury Department using the Office of Foreign Asset Control and the rulemaking there to say these crypto changes are off limit. Crypto exchanges are off limit because they're being used for ransom extortion payments. The DoD, Defend Forward, the FBI has been apprehending people, and the rhetoric used by the federal government, by the administration, is if you're using ransomware against critical infrastructure, you're not a criminal, you're a terrorist. And all those things add up. And I think they have been able to beat down some of this, or at least get targeting moved elsewhere. Wow, we lost a lot of health records this year. I'm just one example there. Shields Health, actually Common Spirit is on the list too. I think there's something like 675,000 records that Common Spirit has lost. Class actions coming from the California Consumer Privacy Act, because there's wording in it that says you do not have to, if your record was disclosed, you do not have to show harm, i.e. fraud was perpetrated, in order to have standing. And so now there are ambulance chasing attorneys that are going after class action suits as soon as there is a records breach. The entire country of Costa Rica was hacked, had to shut down. Unbelievable. And in fact, there's another one of an island country called Vanuatu or something like that. Same thing right now. So the scope of ransomware is able to take down, admittedly, smaller countries that are probably, not as well prepared for things like this. But wow. Chinese conducting financial fraud. We just found out that the Chinese actors did about $20 million in fake PPP loans and SBA loans and stuff like this. It's really troubling when you combine that with the fact that the FBI is warning that the Sandworm group, which is known to be a state-sponsored group in Russia, is going to be using ransomware. There's intelligence there. We know the North Koreans do it. When those countries with those capabilities have gone from espionage to stealing money, we could end up in a real world of hurt here, because China owns all the OPM records. They own the Equifax records. And in aggregate, that stuff is really, really useful for fraud. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, because those records, remember, they have a shelf life, right? People die, can't do fraud, right? So they have to use what they have. And 2023 may be the year that happens. State local cybersecurity grant program is coming. Not a lot of transparency around the planning that's going on right now, but it's coming.
Hey,
Um,
and Mike, stop on that for a second because
yep.
maybe not everybody is familiar. Can you just give 2 sentences on what that is?
No, it's going to have to be more than two.
No,
So,
you got two. Just two. Go.
okay. Um, right now, there is a year of planning occurring in committees that are being established by all 50 states. And those committees are going to have plans, and they're going to hand those to the local governments. And they're going to say, if you want in, you have to accept everything on this plan. There's a number of outcomes that have to be met. Some of these are simple. We got to do multi-factor authentication. Some of these are going to be a heavy lift. For example, you're going to have to address tech debt. That is a heavy lift. For Washington State, there's $14 million been allocated for that. I don't know if that's really going to be enough, but right now it's in the planning phase, and we're not being told a lot about, for example, how procurement is going to be done, because that could end up really snarling things if everybody has to go do competitive procurement for everything on that list. I think that was only one sentence.
Yeah, I listened for semicolons. All right, keep going, Mike.
Okay. Lots of crypto theft. I don't think we need to dive into that. That whole crypto thing, unregulated, not a financial instrument, is landing very poorly with a lot of people who have lost a lot of money. Multi-factor authentication is being compromised now routinely. If you get a phishing message and you're just curious and you want to just hit the link to see how dumb the site looks that's going to try and get your password, you may have given up your session token already, and you may get a multi-factor authentication challenge right after that, because there are scripts out there right now that are doing exactly that, grabbing your session token and then brokering an MFA attempt to log into Microsoft. Deepfakes, whoa, they're getting really good. Disinformation everywhere. Media literacy in the United States, in the toilet, will believe anything hung in front of you if it confirms your existing worldview. We've dug a bad hole for ourselves, and until we start, doing some media literacy training for the younglings, we're going to be stuck in this. Yeah, cyber war going on in Ukraine and elsewhere. Again, China and India are really kind of getting after it right now. And that drone-based attack, where they actually got the drone to crash and recovered it, and what it was doing was sniffing Wi-Fi around the building. It had a laptop on the drone. There was actually a couple of them, and um, that's that's new. That's a new tactic, to fly a drone up to a building and try to use that to sniff passwords. You got to give somebody some credit for that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
those are not even an exhaustive list of like all the stuff that went down this year.
Well, year's a long time. Um, wait, before we go away from that, I will say if folks on this are not signed up for Mike's Daily Blast, an email that he's been sending for 15 years, you can sign up for it on our website. You get all the headlines that Mike puts together every day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday. And that's where he pulls all of this from.
And holidays and when I don't want to.
All right, Mike, what are your predictions for nation state activity?
Okay, so we got several buckets of predictions here, and I'm giving everybody a lot of fodder to come back next year and go, nah, you're so wrong. So when we say that the FBI is now, apprehending criminals, right? These are ransomware gang guys. That's different from the North Korean and Chinese and Russian state-sponsored actors that we have identified. Now, because these folks are on these lists, hop on a plane, go to Belgium, you're going to get snatched. And if we do that, there is going to be some diplomacy problem there. We've seen Russia do testing to cut themselves off from the rest of the world, and we know that there are a lot of countries right now with very authoritarian leadership that basically use the internet and the ability to get information as a weapon. And so balkanization, first for the purpose of controlling populations, but second, so that eventually we can start enforcing a border around a country. I think we're going to see more of that next year. It's not going to take off, but we're definitely going to see some countries that unplug, go dark when they're having internal problems. I think if this stuff keeps up and Russian cyber gangs keep coming after us and going after critical infrastructure, we're going to tweak them, and we are not going to leave any fingerprints. But I think some infrastructure there, hopefully not resulting in any loss of life, I think that's going to happen to Russia. It will be us. Um, the wipers that are going around, and these are really proliferating right now, right? It looks like ransomware, but it destroys data. You're never getting it back. I think somebody's going to hit some OT with that stuff, right? It's difficult to take over operational technologies. It's very sophisticated stuff like Stuxnet, but to just wipe it out, that's pretty easy, and I think we're going to see that.
And wait, and an important detail about that: when you say it looks like ransomware,
Yep.
what that actually means is it comes in, it asks for a ransom, you pay the ransom, and then it turns out that, oh, sorry, it wiped everything.
Yep.
Okay.
We're going to try and get countries together to talk about norms, right? Because just having our backsides handed to us is getting really unpleasant. And so that's got to be done, at the government level. There will be efforts to do that. China and Russia are not going to play along. And I do think China is going to be the big disinformation player in the next election. We've already seen signs of that. And the thing about the financial fraud and the shelf life of the big data sets, I think that's going to appear in the coming year as well, right? The more we see countries starting to leverage the data that they've stolen from us to throw our financial system into chaos, those are going to be nation state fingerprints on that. Okay, those are nation state predictions.
All right, what do you got for regulatory predictions?
And everybody take a sigh of relief. This is my last slide. Okay, so CISA cannot regulate, like I said, but they're going to continue to work with the sector-specific agencies. And so, if you're in one of those critical sectors, dams, water, finance, energy, health, blah, 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 right? Government, right? There are going to be some rules that they're pushing down on you, along with insurance companies doing the same thing. And this is going to be a tough year, I think, from a regulatory sense, because everybody's just going to be saying, here's what you have to do. On the other hand, since Republicans have taken control of the House of Representatives, that some of that could be pulled back, and I think some of that will be pulled back. And I think in the financial sector, where the SEC is really going wild with this, you will report in 3 days. I think that's going to get pulled back. Now, CISA, again, cannot regulate, but they can sure suggest. And so reporting through their CERCIA initiative that they're going through right now, that will be voluntary. They may be able to get the critical sectors to make this mandatory, but they're always it's going to be voluntary for other sectors. And I think finance is going to escape this. Insurance companies are not going to stop their quest to figure out how to price risk better. And just like today, in fact, my wife just signed us up for this. It's called Mobile Mile or something like that, and it's a device you put in your vehicle that reports back how many miles a week you drive. There's others that will report how fast you drive, stuff like this, and that's used to price insurance. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where real-time monitoring data or snapshots or vulnerability scans on some frequency are going to be required to submit to the insurance company so they understand the risk that you represent as an insured. And then finally, I think that we are going to get to a point where the federal government will become a reinsurer. So this thing about nation state acts that cause collateral damage, FedGov can be in the driver's seat there, trying to help the insurance companies, not tip over from things like that happening, because we're probably looking at more things like that happening.
Well, and there's a customer of ours who I talked to recently. I was looking to see if they're here to see if they could chime in, but they're not. Where they just got told if they want insurance next year, they have to have a better EDR solution than they have, and a SOC has to be monitoring the EDR solution. That is that is now in their insurance requirement, and it is, you will not get insurance next year if you don't have it. So
Which is why managed services will continue to grow, because there's not enough bodies to go out and hire to make a SOC happen everywhere.
yeah, Fred, you've been dealing with organizations and insurance for a long time. Does any, we're going to get to your technical predictions here in a second, but do you think Mike is right about these? And two, do any of it surprise you?
No, but it's absolutely where it's going to be heading. They have to have more insurance. They've had their, what's handed to them in the last 2 years. They've been losing money hand over fist. They cannot continue the way they're going. So there may be even a greater pullback and more requirements and more rigorous, levels of monitoring imposed before they figure out what's the appropriate level. So I think they're still experimenting and figuring it out.
Yep. And people are asking what EDR did they have to replace? I have to look and see exactly what it is. But Fred, there's different EDR there's different things that call themselves EDR out there, but it was one of the really lightweight ones. I have to go back and look at my email.
It usually has to do with the monitoring capabilities. Can you monitor it outside of the EDR environment? Meaning, can any SIM intake that data and monitor it? There's some EDRs that's not possible.
Right. And so, right. And that's exactly right. So it's because they want it to be monitored by a SOC, and that is not a possibility that they said, no, you got to move to something like Defender or Sophos or CrowdStrike, something that can be monitored by a SOC. And then that discussion that we had earlier of if you have an EDR solution that says, oh, yeah, we'll monitor it for you. Well, they're only going to monitor that endpoint solution. And that was not good enough for what the insurance company wanted.
Right.
The insurance company wanted that, you have to have monitoring of your entire environment, of course, not just the endpoints.
Wasn't it Trend Micro? Wasn't that the one that they said they
no,
had
no. That was different. No, I'll look it up. But no, it was not. I love John's comment: insurance companies versus product marketing departments at some tech firms. Yes, indeed. All right, Fred, technical predictions.
Sure. So for a lot of us, and if you're in the trenches at all with Microsoft, I think the number one wish that everyone has is that Microsoft will either completely simplify their licensing approach, or put some very definitive documentation that everyone can go and look and say, here is what I get for this license level for this particular product. It is wildly, it's changing continuously. In fact, in the middle of a particular license, you may get a different set of data because they're constantly changing the types of data they're sending over these APIs. So we really wish Microsoft would make it as transparent and easy as possible to people to understand, if I want to do real security, here's the license level I need to do it, because the lower license levels in Microsoft do not allow you to do good security. Zero trust. Okay. It's going to be.
Hang on. I just got to say this. It is reprehensible of Microsoft to make people pay to get their own security events that they created. I can't believe they're getting away with it.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you're the big dog. So zero trust, for those that don't know, it's really a very large, expansive concept with dozens of components that goes into a zero trust architecture. If you see what the DoD and CISA put out, it is like 50 pages of some of the most complex diagrams I've ever seen to implement a zero trust architecture. So it will be at the peak of inflated expectations in the Gartner hype cycle, but we're beginning to have that steep drop off into the
trough of disillusionment.
Correct. Because really, most people are going to adopt multi-factor authentication and encrypted communications. Other than that, it's going to be very difficult to really extend into the other parts of zero trust. The one we all kind of joke about, but either GPT will not become sentient and take over, or I, for one, welcome our new Chat GPT overlords, to give a Kent Brockmanism in there. So, but this is significant. For example, a Chat GPT can write really decent Python code. You tell it what you want it to write, it'll write it. That means that people that are maybe not as savvy can actually start using it to write hacking scripts or particular pieces of malware or things like that. So it's going to be an interesting world where we have AI answering our questions for us. Supply chain attacks are going to I think that's going to be the biggest problem in this upcoming year. What you hear, for example, like LastPass had 2 hacks in the last 4 months. They said that they didn't get to any of the things that would allow people to see the secrets or see the content in people's accounts. But that does not mean that they were not able to hack the LastPass infrastructure itself, which would then allow them to see that stuff. So I think there's a whole bunch of other shoes that are about ready to drop. We know Okta got hacked, LastPass got hacked. One of these is going to turn into a major supply chain attack, and there's going to be a big problem. And I think a lot of this could end up in into the healthcare sector, in particular with medical devices as well. There are certain medical devices that are ubiquitous. People don't spend enough time and effort managing them. The people that actually manages medical devices in most healthcare environments is the biomedical group, not IT, not information security. In fact, while they're fantastic biomedical experts, they are not security folks. They're not networking folks, and they're not really good at keeping those systems patched and up to date. And the medical device manufacturers are actually probably to some degree contributing to the problem. So I think this is going to be an area where we have to keep our eyes wide open. When this happens, if it happens, you have to make sure you understand what's in your supply chain and what's in your infrastructure and how this may affect you. Full automation.
Hey, Fred, before we get to the next one of the fears, so I, as folks know, I go to a lot of healthcare conferences, and the biggest fear I ever hear is that our EHR, our electronic health record system, is, that there's going to be a breach there. Well, and those are big companies, Epic, Cerner, and I'm not saying they will get breached, but what's the reality there, Fred?
Well, the reality is the same way there it was for SolarWinds, or the fact that a whole bunch of particular very large enterprise level companies have had their software packages hacked. The other problem here is, as we are starting to understand, there are so many open source components that may get folded in when you're building an enterprise application like Log4j or any number of other open source components.
SSL.
Right, SSL, right, the SSH. I mean, all these. All it takes is for one of those services that is folded in to these larger things like Epic and Cerner and EHR. If they're using those components, they will become vulnerable. If I think that is probably the way that this will happen if it does happen.
Got it. Okay, keep going.
Okay. Full automation. So we kind of talked about this, folks. This was kind of our AI replacing us joke a little bit ago, but full automation is not going to solve all your problems. And why is that? Well, if you look at the way automation works in our industry, it is a discrete series of automation events. Nothing, and probably it's too complex to ever get there, can be fully automated because there are decision trees that have to happen. There's some qualitative decisions that may have to happen. So what I expect is, we're not going to get to the point where we're just going to step back and let automation do it. We're going to have even a new field where people are actually managing the automation, right? To make sure all the automation, the connecting tissue, the tendons that connect all these different systems and processes together, that I think is going to be a space that will start coming out because we have so much complex technology. It's so difficult to glue it together. We're trying to do it with humans. They're overwhelmed. It becomes pretty obvious we have to find some way out of this, and automation is it. I expect managed automation to be a thing. I will say if any prediction here is my 99.9% go to Vegas bet on it, it's that this will be the year of cloud security posture management. Every event we went to in the second half of 2022, was the exhibit floors were nothing but vendors and service providers for cloud security posture management. If you don't know what that is basically your kind of configuration management, your vulnerability management approach to your entire cloud infrastructure. So all of us, pretty much, it's in some level, are either in the cloud now or going to be in 2023. It's really going to be difficult for anyone to stay out. So we think these are foundational tools. If you're going to go in, you're going to build in the cloud, you should have this, or you should have a service that actually runs these maybe 3-4 times a week and is constantly reporting to you on how your environment is changing. Because we know an S3 bucket that's exposed to the public can be the fastest route to having a major breach. And if you can spot that rapidly because somebody made a mistake, that's what cloud security posture management can do for you. So we believe this is going to be a table stakes offering for people. And we're going to go deeper, right? Because now we're running a lot of our critical workloads are all running in the cloud. So you will hear these two new acronyms: Cloud Workload Protection Platforms and Cloud Native Application Protection Platforms. They essentially do the same types of things. It's just how those particular functions are accomplished. Cloud native, of course, is stuff native to the cloud. You may be running workload protections kind of separate from cloud native applications. So, but taking these together, it's what are our applications doing? What kind of anomalous behavior should we be watching for? What kind of indicators of compromise will come only from our applications? And since we're not managing the software-defined networking in the cloud, we're not managing maybe even the systems, we're just spinning up Lambda containers as needed. This stuff becomes critically important. It's a whole new world. We need new instrumentation. We need new ways to monitor, and we need new ways to know when bad things are happening.
So before we move on, there's a question came up in the chat, and somebody else actually emailed me about this morning, and you mentioned LastPass. So many people use LastPass, use the password managers, that the fact that they had 2 breaches, right? That it looks like LastPass had 2 breaches. Has really caused heartburn. So, Carrie asked in the chat, are there safe password systems that you recommend besides LastPass? Let's just stop and talk about what happened at LastPass. And I mean, because it would be very easy to predict that the password they're just companies, right? There will be more breaches of password management companies, right?
Yes.
Just like every kind of company, it's not going to stop. But I mean, to the earlier point Fred made, the passwords, right, credentials were not affected by this. So yeah, I mean, they took a hit, but I think they got up off the mat reasonably quickly, and it wasn't the kind of thing that would have affected anybody's operational use of LastPass. So I frankly have no problem with it. It's 6 to 1, 2 pi of the other. And the whole cyber event now is completely foreseeable. So it's hard to hold them to a standard that really none of us can really meet.
Yeah. If you want an analog from about 10 years ago now, it was when RSA was breached and had their seeds, all their seeds for their secure IDs were compromised. And RSA had to literally replace everything they had deployed out in the field because they had a compromise of their seeds for their secure ID. This is a similar potential approach. A bad guy could compromise everything at somebody like LastPass by getting into some component of their infrastructure. But I will say the types of encryption, the way it's designed for these companies, it is next to impossible to actually get to the encryption key to the data that you own, because they don't actually have the encryption key. Only you do. So that is the one safety factor. But again, if there's a way to use their technology to potentially intercept that encryption key that I only have because of a supply chain attack where I've hacked the software, that's how that changes the equation. So this is the fear. And like you were saying, who do you go to? Whoever you think's the most secure. I mean, I'd look at LastPass and I go, guys aren't doing really what I want to see to make me comfortable that that's where I want to be, right? There's probably other vendors that have a cleaner record than they do. Does that mean they're any better? No, LastPass is a giant. That's why they had a big target on them. So it's always going to have risk, unfortunately.
Yep. Makes sense. All right, let's see here. So, Mike, one of the things we always talk about is the, three things to do right. If you're gonna, attacks are gonna come. You're gonna get, they're gonna come your way. You have to be prepared. So 2023, if you don't have an updated incident response plan, prepare for an attack, get an assessment, make sure, but no, the bad guys are going to get in and you have to be able to detect it quickly and you have to be able to respond rapidly. There's some more there, there are more questions in the chat. And I want to get to the, so Richard says predictions concerning FIDO2.
Well, we've actually discussed using, hardware tokens ourselves. And, I think that especially if, like in federal government DoD space, stuff like that, right? They've been in use for a long time, right? Your CAT card. And I think that, penetration into more of not necessarily the consumer market, but, the business market, because credentials are so under attack right now, successfully being attacked. And you even a multi-factor authentication challenge, we've seen this stuff close up happen. Pretty hard to defeat a physical token that you got to put into a machine. So yeah, I think that's going somewhere.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
that the big challenge is going to be there's a lot of competing things happening, like Passkey and Windows Hello and all these, OAuth. I mean, who's going to win, right? Who's going to win here? Now, a lot of them have become interoperable, which has become, I think, the strongest, best thing that's happened. There was the different worlds, and now these worlds have now started crossing over and allowing interoperability. But the bottom line is, if you want safety, I mean, Mike and I, we had our first, what was the name of that thing we had, Mike? Crypto card.
Oh
Crypto card.
man. Oh, that's going way back.
That we used to use as a second factor authentication in the 90s when we were running our earliest business.
Yep.
So we've been doing it 30 years. And for us, it's second nature.
Hey, and Donna wants to know, any thoughts on biometric multi-factor authentication?
I think for your phone, when it's got a camera on it, and it can take a picture of your face or give it a thumbprint or something like that, it's already out there. Using biometric authentication at a business becomes tricky, because there are, a lot of false negatives that you have to put up with. So I don't think it's perfect yet. But for things like, physical entry, yeah, we're going to see a whole lot more bioauthentication, a palm print or something like that, right? How I used to get into the emergency operations center for the city when it snowed 2 inches. That's going to start showing up, I think, all over the place.
Yeah, and but what do you? I know that there's one city that I talked to where they're having trouble.
Cracking me up.
Where they're having trouble getting folks to do MFA at all because they don't want their cell phone, used for work purposes unless you're going to pay for my cell phone. So, like, how are you going to convince employees? Oh yeah, give me your fingerprint, or let me have your biometric information.
And consider too, once you have that information and you're using it to authenticate your users, you now have to protect that information. And when we're talking about privacy statutes popping up all over the place, losing your biometric authentication information is probably going to result in real bad litigation. So I would think businesses in particular would want to be careful with that kind of stuff and kind of relegate that to, like I say, physical entry. But I mean, it could go either way, right? I mean, with all of the authentication, and Fred rolled them up, OAuth, FIDO, all of these things, bioauthentication is probably going to play a part in some of it. But I would be reluctant to store all of my employees' fingerprint data.
I also like to point out too, like when you're using your fingerprint on your phone, all it's doing is protecting the password you already typed in the
Right.
first time you logged in. Okay, you're not really authenticating with your finger. You're just unlocking the password you've already typed in. So a lot of this stuff is a little bit kludgy in the sense that the factors are intrinsically tied together, whereas the password and the is just being unlocked by the thumbprint. But the other problem is it's trivially easy to get thumbprints or fingerprints, right? And they've shown that a good Photoshop program with a fingerprint taken off a glass, about 99% of the time you can compromise a fingerprint reader because it's just meant to read a pattern, and if you can copy that pattern off something else, hey, you're in, right? If you've ever used it on your phone, half the time you barely get your finger on the thing and it unlocks it. So it's not the strongest of second factors, that's for sure. Now, the question you were asking, Jake, is what's the easy way to do this? Well, how about prox keys? Okay, that's what they do in medical world. You wear a prox key around you in a card around your neck. You walk up to the computer. All you have to be is close enough to the computer to type, and it knows you're there and it reads your second factor. So there are ways to get around this. They're just more expensive, unfortunately.
Yep. All right, Mike and Fred, get ready for your final thoughts here. I do want to tell folks a couple of things. Number one is I'm going to put a survey in the chat. We would really appreciate it if you took the survey. We do surveys in each one of our events, and there are two reasons to take the survey. One is you get to give us feedback. How'd we do? Was this useful? And in there, you get to tell us if our predictions were right. Actually, their predictions, Mike and Fred's, that are not mine. If they were right. Also, for every survey, either you can get a gift card or donate the value of that gift card to Girls Who Code, which is a great charity, and so we'd really appreciate it if you took a survey. Also, if as you hear this and you look at your 2023 predictions, if you want some help preparing for an attack, detecting or responding, let us know. We're happy to help. We're always here for you. And if you want to get in contact, one of my colleagues, Ellie, that is the number to get Ellie and her email address. So let us know. And Paige asks, can I do the survey after reviewing the recording? You can do the survey whenever you want, Paige. But we appreciate you taking it. All right. Final thoughts. Fred, go ahead. We lose Fred?
Yeah, 2023 will be more eventful than 2022. It's going to be a wild ride. That's all I can say. That's the real prediction. Just get ready for more of the same unpredictable, wild, crazy stuff.
Mike, final thoughts.
Mainly because the population of actors with skills in nation states getting into, developing their cyber war capabilities, activists, mercenaries, people that are actively bribing insiders. 2023 is going to be a bad year. It's just like Fred said, this is going to be a wild ride.
Yep. Okay, and one last question that came up. Paul says, can you list several password managers for us to evaluate or choose from ourselves? Two that have, for example, given us discount codes are 1Password and Dashlane. Mike and Fred, there are many more out there. What else is out there?
Well,
those are kind of the top ones. But
here's what I'll throw out. I'm a contrarian here. You can pick whether you believe Google or potentially Microsoft or where you want to store that information. To be honest, Google already has access, and Microsoft, for me, can get in anything I own. Literally. I mean, they're the two people on the planet or entities on the planet that already own me. I'm comfortable storing my password with them.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Like I said, 6 of one, half dozen of another.
I like your
2 pi better. I can
better.
prove that 6 is equal to 2 pi. I can prove that.
So my prediction for 2023 is that Mike will make 50% more math jokes, and I will understand 25% fewer. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you have a great holidays. If you need anything, be in touch. Remember, the holidays is the time where the bad guys try to get in the most because, well, people aren't around. So make sure you do everything you can before you head out for the holidays. And And as Jonathan says, make sure your password is not password 1234. All right, everybody. Have a great holidays. We will see you in the new year. And thanks so much for joining us. And don't forget,
Thanks.
take the survey. Take the survey. Take the survey.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.